Well, good evening and welcome. We're very pleased that you all have joined us this evening. We also want to welcome our good friends from C-SPAN who are taping tonight's program. It will be broadcast on Book TV at a future time. Also, please know we have books for sale in the back, and I'm sure our authors will be happy to sign those for you. The doors are locked. You cannot leave until all the books have been sold. Martin Luther King often quoted the 19th century abolitionist Thomas Parker, who said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." I was thinking about that today as we set up and prepared for this program, because today is April 9th. And on April 9th, 1963, 50 years ago this very day, 4 young black college students walked in the front door of this building down the stairs. They went over to a table, they sat down and started to read. Or as one of them described to me later, fake read, because he was scared he was about to be arrested. Birmingham's libraries in those days were segregated. We had branch libraries for African Americans, but this building was closed to blacks. They could not enter the building, they could not use the collections here. Those 4 students came in that day. They sat down, they did what you do in a library, they read for a while, but they also knocked down a wall. The next day, more students from Miles College came. They sat down, they read. One of them went to the desk and asked for a library card. On the next day, April 11th, the library board, somewhat reluctantly, voted, but bending to the arc of justice, the library board voted to desegregate the Birmingham Public Library. That was one day before Dr. Martin Luther King was arrested and began writing his letter from Birmingham Jail. Think about the fact that this building that 50 years ago tonight was closed to African Americans now houses one of the finest research collections in existence on the civil rights movement and the African American experience. And it's out of that collection, in part, that the book we're going to celebrate tonight has been researched and written. We're pleased to have 2 authors with us tonight. First, we have Jonathan Reider, who is professor of sociology at Barnard College, Columbia University. He's the author of The Word of the Lord is Upon Me, the righteous performance of Martin Luther King, Jr., and has been a regular commentator on TV and radio, a contributor to the New York Times Book Review, and a contributing editor to New Republic. Also with us is Diane McWhorter. Diane is a Pulitzer Prize-winning author of Carry Me Home, Birmingham, Alabama, and the Climatic Battle of the Civil Rights Movement, which has just been re-released in a new updated paperback edition. She is also the author of A Dream for Freedom, A History of the Civil Rights Movement for Young Readers, and she writes regularly for the New York Times, USA Today, and Slate. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Jonathan Reider.
I should say, not to add luster to my resume, but just to reassure that I'm not a self-righteous northerner, that I've also written about white racism in Brooklyn as well. So I've Canarsie, the Jews and Italians of Brooklyn against liberalism. Let me say, first off, a certain humility is in order. For one thing, it's just a tremendous delight to be here with Diane McWhorter, whose telling of Carry Me Home is as epic and unsurpassable as the events in Birmingham themselves, or certainly has the epic quality that what people did in this town deserves. And I can tell you, I don't want to be too gracious, buy my book first, but there's plenty of new stuff in the new edition, so buy that too. There's another reason for humility. I couldn't have done Gospel of Freedom without 2 very special people. Our host for the evening, Jim Baggett, who many, many years ago first prepared my way in the Bull Connor collection. And you have no idea how long it took me to get used to the very idea of a Bull Connor collection. You may be used to that phrase. And so I thank also the things that his institution, the Birmingham Public Library, has done in making this history alive. I also need to thank another gifted archivist and wonderful person, Laura Anderson of the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, for similar kinds of my dependence, I must say. And she was the one who first connected me to some of the relatively unknown tapes of Dr. King, some of which, if the sound system doesn't fail us tonight, I'll play a little bit. And if I've had any ability in my book to try to bring alive the mass meetings with the sound of King, King in pathos, King in majesty, King in bitterness and resentment, all the different sides of King, I owe those recordings, and the man who donated them to the BCRI, Reverend C. Herbert Oliver, another great freedom fighter in Birmingham who was fighting racism and segregation back in 1948. But I want to say what Jim and Laura and their institutions do is not simply logistical and practical. The words make it possible for us never to forget the courage and the blood and the sacrifice out of which America was born as a democracy. So there's a sacred as well as a logistical aspect in which these two research institutions do, because as we know from a whole lot of other settings, if you're going to avoid the past and understand something like never again, you have to know how to remember, and you can't remember sentimentally or dishonesty. Jim and Laura make that possible. And finally, and most importantly, if there's any humility here, it's, and I'm going to think of Dr. King here in Birmingham, in a mass meeting, and I'm paraphrasing and taking liberties, but that was his creative use of language, so it's in keeping with him, that I've only written about history. The people in Birmingham made that history. And in rising up 50 years ago, they, and I really should, for some of the people in the room, you didn't make only history in Birmingham, but you helped make the nation anew. And I'll come back to that because that ultimately is the meaning of the 50th year. And we don't want to really give in to some notion that that history was easy. We can be proud in America, but we don't honor whatever the values of the Constitution and the Declaration are by pretending that was the time of unfreedom in order to congratulate ourselves that we've got to the promised land. I should add that part of the other honor, I'll just add quickly, is in my other work on King, I've spent time with the foot soldiers. We know the famous people, but there are all those amazing colleagues of Dr. King who went into Selma and went into Demopolis and went into a dozen other places, people like Reverend Willie Bolden and J.T. Johnson. I never got a chance to meet James Orange, but I had the privilege of interviewing Andrew Marisette some years ago, that man of gentle defiance. And he reminds us it was the young people on the streets of Birmingham who made flesh the theories that Dr. King put forward in the letter from Birmingham Jail. When he talked about extremists for love and justice, it was Fred Shuttlesworth and all the people in the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights, and James Orange and Meatball and Andrew Marisette and all those young people. And we can't let history forget what they did as well. Now, in this audience, I'm not going to spend a lot of time rehashing the dramatic details of the freedom struggle, but I do need to set the context before I get into the letter, and I'll try to do this pretty quickly, because when I'm done, I'm going to mix it up with some questions with Jim and Diane, but we also want to get to those of you who are in the audience. So, what is that history? The legendary Fred Shuttlesworth and the ACM HR, the mass meetings vibrating with the sound, I'm on my way to Canaan land. The defiant young people who stared down the diabolical Bull Connor. Connor finally losing it on May 3rd, and the world owes him greatly, as President Kennedy once said. Bobby Kennedy said it too, actually, that the movement owed Connor for finally losing